Hey, this is not a mistake. I'm actually back with a different show. Thank you very much. This is the Voice of Job Seekers Live, and I'm glad to be back with you, bringing you a series of authors and thought leaders as we talk about the future of work. We're talking about the present and future of job search. And my first guest is Scott Beeson, who I've known for a long time. He is a professor at Fairleigh Dickinson University and has been doing that for a lot of years. And of course, he studies the family, marriage, and workplace dynamic. And if you ever need a great resource and great books on that particular topic, he is the guy that you want to look up for his series of books and also his articles that he's written all over the place. And of course, you can also catch some of the interviews that he's done, which are about maybe probably hundreds of them, maybe at this particular point. But Scott, thank you very much for coming back. Your book, The Whole Person Workplace, Building Better Workplaces Through Work-Life Wellness and Employee Support, is coming out in a couple of weeks. You've been studying this for a long time. I guess as sort of a subtitle to everything else you've been doing throughout the years.
Yes. So first off, Mark, great to be here, and this cool new format and everything. I'm excited about. But yes, you're right. So I've been a management professor for a long time. So I've been studying workplaces and organizations. My initial focus was really in work, family, and work life, things like parental leave, workplace flexibility, and then I had kind of like my academic mid-career crisis where I was like, I don't want to write for like 50 other academics in this boring, like, jargony journals. And I'm like, well, who really needs good information about work-life issues and work-life challenges? And the first was Working Parents. And that was my prior book, The Working Dad Survival Guide, which is, I think, the first time we kind of did a podcast or something together.
Right.
And now this is for employers. So how can employers, managers, HR types build better workplaces that work for everybody and help employees in their whole lives, like recognizing that they're not just like, they don't just exist from 9 to 5, and they just don't have a piece of themselves at work. Like they're a whole person.
Mhm.
And, if employers can recognize that, then it opens up like, well, how do we make sure that this whole person who works for me is okay, is well, is not stressed and anxious, and we can maybe help them with some of their responsibilities, priorities,
Mhm.
stressors, challenges they face in their lives.
Well, that's very interesting. You should say that because we're seeing a trend now where there are some companies that are having returnship programs for those who've been working remote and uh, they've been on pregnancy leave or taking care of a loved one, whatever. They're coming back to the force, and there are companies and there's some large entities that are saying, "Hey, welcome back. Let us help you on board." Is that a good step as far as you're concerned, as far as accepting people and embracing the whole person?
Yeah, I think so. I think, it's been a horrible 2 years for everybody in so many
Sure.
ways. One silver lining in this very, very black cloud is that workplaces have begun really experimenting and thinking more creatively about their employees, and including things like returnship programs, where, maybe 5 years ago, someone who had a baby or whatever else didn't think they could make it work, right? Between having, growing their family and working at that employer. And what a
Mhm.
returnship program really says is, you know what, that was our, sorry, like that was our fault.
Yeah.
Let's bring you back and, make sure that, you get back onto your career track, and we can give you the support now that perhaps we either chose not to or weren't capable of doing before. And a lot more employers, I think, have gotten the message again over the last 18 months of seeing the living rooms of their employees and their cats and their children walking by, that,
Sure.
that like, the employee doesn't cease existing when the workday ends, right? And that how well someone is feeling outside of work impacts work. So I think more smart employers have recognized that
Mhm.
the false wall between work and life, is now recognized as more false than it had been before, and that opens up opportunities to do things like, again, there's work life things like leave and flexibility, but it also includes things like help for elder care, or continuing education, or giving people time to volunteer, or just respecting paid time off, or designing work in a way that people feel better about what they're doing. There's a whole
Mhm.
host of ways we can, help our employees feel good as whole people. And that returns to us by building a great culture, a place where people want to work, and will stay.
Yeah. Well, I think the two, there's a struggle with some other employers who are not just a battle between, whether they should work in the office or not,
Mhm.
but for the fact that they're not always recognizing people as the whole person. Uh, because I think that people are going in and they're expected that their behavior is going to ignore the fact that they have a child running back and forth in the background, or
Right.
that the pet comes in the middle of a webcam. Do you think that, what kind of things that do you see where there might be an adjustment period
Yeah.
for both the employer and the employee in this new environment, and what we should expect then for people to accept each other as whole?
Yeah. So just to, you didn't say this, but just to talk about one misconception is that a whole person workplace means that anything goes and blah. That's
Right.
not the case,
Right. Yeah,
right?
totally not.
Okay. It means that, because some people get the impression that this is like, oh, people are gonna, you'll be a doormat if you do that, but it's like,
Mhm.
no. I mean, it just means you lead with trust, and then, try to figure out ways to be supportive, and then, most people rise to that, right?
Right.
And those who don't, then you manage and you adjust, and maybe, somebody's not a good fit for you or something down the line. But anyway, but getting to your question, um, yeah, I think that there's the, there's the issue between, um, you know we don't want to necessarily monopolize somebody's life, right?
Right.
Overworking somebody and blurring those lines is not a way to be a whole person employer, right? That's
Mhm.
not taking care of somebody as a whole person. That's exploiting more of their time as an employee, right?
Right.
So it's going to be an adjustment period, as you say. So many. I think the summer for most employers was like, here's our plan for returning to workplace, or returning most of our people most of the time. The fall, and I think timed with like back to school, is when most employers were like, okay, this is when we're going to lock in our new way of doing things. Of
Mhm.
course, now with Delta variant and all these other things, all this stuff is being thrown into chaos, right? And then I think maybe getting into winter, spring, I think this is when it's going to sort itself out, and organizations are going to learn, and employees are going to learn through this transition period, and be like, okay, this is how we're going to run things.
Mhm.
So this is the time for experimentation. But with, I was just saying, with Delta variant, and who knows, things get worse. Maybe schools don't bring their kids back in person, and then if you were bringing all your employees back in person, like, now what do you do? How do you support these people? So you need, I think, the number one key for employers right now is to retain at least some elements of flexibility, so that you're resilient when conditions change, and
Mhm.
do what you can to make sure people are psychologically safe, to either come back to the workplace, or whatever else we're asking them to do. So we want to make sure people feel all right. Again, the stress of like, oh my God, my unvaccinated young kid is going back to school. That's
Mhm.
anxiety. Is there something an employer can do about that? Maybe there isn't, but at least the compassion and the empathy would be helpful. But maybe altering somebody's schedule so they could do drop off and pick up, is a specific thing they could do, right?
Right. Mhm.
So anyway, but I think just, having that empathetic mindset, and then, allowing, uh, just being agile as an employer is really, really important, because, we saw this great resignation and the great reset, right? I
Mhm.
think a lot of that's employees who felt like their employer didn't really consider their needs during the last 18 months or so, looking for maybe opportunities where an employer might.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that I think about is, as you mentioned, I think the most agile company is going to win,
Yeah.
and they also have to think about the winning the best talent. So, in essence, what are the best? How is the best talent showing up? Is going to be the way the company often is going to go, because they're going to want that, and they're going because they know at the end of it all that there's profit and there's gain and there's other factors that benefits them solely more so than the employee.
Yeah. So, again, the whole person workplace, I'm envisioning as more than just like employers doing this out of self interest. They're doing it hopefully in genuine interest of helping their employees with the rest of their life challenges. But
Mhm.
it is true that in this case, you're doing well by doing good, right? Or something to that effect, where,
Right, right.
if you build a culture where, people feel appreciated and valued, again, you're going to attract more and maybe better talent. You'll be able to be more selective. People will want to stay. They'll be more engaged and focused when they're there. And, that's the long-term sustainable way to build a great company.
Sure.
Now, I have more sympathy for smaller organizations that might not have kind of the Slack resources and other
Mhm,
things, right? And the short term is always right there for them.
mhm,
But even small employers, in the whole person workplace, I talk to leaders at multinational companies and a store literally with 8 employees. And everything in between. And there are solutions if we're creative about it and really value employees, that we can put things in place that make better workplaces that work for everybody, not just
mhm.
for the bosses, but a workplace that works for everybody.
So, of the small companies that you've talked to, what have been some of the, or maybe one example of a creative idea where the employer has said, "Hey, this is easier to implement, or this is a creative way to do it without blowing the bank open."
Right. Okay. So one great example. So this is I think there's 2 locations of this natural food store out in like the Lake Tahoe area in California.
Mhm,
And one employee was having trouble getting to work, just didn't have like reliable transportation. So the
mhm,
boss was going to buy a new car and was going to trade in his old one and was going to get like $1,000 from the dealer for it. Instead, he
mhm.
gave it to this employee. Okay, maybe that's not totally replicable, but like
Right, right,
creative,
right.
right? But they gave it to this employee. So now this employee had reliable transportation. The way the person told me, was telling me the story, is like that's 75 cents an hour for a year of this person working for me. And it's, in grocery and retail, turnover's high.
Mhm,
Um, it's like, and now this person 5 years later still works there as an assistant manager, is like totally like the pay it forward person. He's been like telling people how great it is to work here because of the consideration his boss gives him. And, you know, ultimately the owner of the company is like, who wouldn't buy that for $1,000?
right.
So that's $1,000. And,
Mhm,
now I don't think we should necessarily just give cars to our employees, right? That's not what I'm saying. But
right.
I'm saying we could be more, just more creative about it. When you're a small company, you can get to know the people and figure out solutions that work for each individual person. Bigger companies obviously can have the more widespread policy. There's one other very small employer, a small convenience store in New Hampshire that during the pandemic, the employees just said, instead of the tip jar for them, they
Mhm.
rewrote it for the food bank. So that,
Nice.
yeah, and the employees did it themselves, and these are hourly employees, not making a lot of money.
Mhm,
Um, and the bosses saw this, and they were like, you know what? What a wonderful idea! That's so wonderful of you. So they wound up doing a match for those tips every week, and they've continued to do it, and they've bought something like over 25,000 meals, or the equivalent of that, for the food bank of um, central New Hampshire. And like that's a way to validate, right, an employee's priority that it might not even be particularly work related, right, in that
mhm.
case. So that's just 2 examples from small employers. And of course the big employers can have like, work from home and,
Right,
12 weeks
right.
parental leave and, the stuff like that.
Yeah, but I think that you tapped onto something as well, that the employees will respond and will respond more if there is a shared value and that there's a mission that everybody has in common. The employees did something, and then the employer came behind and expanded it, and the salary probably isn't as big a deal as for the fact that everybody is doing something on one accord and feel like they're part of the same team because there's a response to it.
Yeah, well, that's absolutely it. It's validating, right? Something else about them besides just
Mhm.
the fact that they work from this hour to this hour, right? It's
Right.
validating their desire to give back to their community. It's validating, right? And so they're being
Mhm.
recognized, they're being seen, they're being listened to. And, what human being, what whole person doesn't want that, right?
Right, right, and I find it very interesting that people are not saying money isn't always, or salary increase isn't always something that's going to, because when you have a mission, your day goes faster and your day becomes purposeful, and then you don't mind investing as an employee into that mission because that's a part of what
Yeah.
you are, who you are anyway, as the whole person, as opposed to working for a larger company who doesn't really care about what you care about, feeding the homeless, or whether and maybe they do have a bigger mission, but it's not your mission. So it makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah, I think, well, a couple of things there. That one, I think large companies, a lot of them do donation matching, and they give people paid time off to volunteer and
Mhm.
things like that too. So, like, even within that space, larger employees can do some of that, right?
Right.
And listen, I'm very clear in the book. You have to pay people a livable wage, right? Or else none of this really
Right.
matters. Because at the baseline,
Absolutely.
that's
Absolutely.
literally valuing your employees, right? But beyond that, right, once people get to a certain level of pay, what you want them to do is to not like worry about how much money they're making anymore, and then they could
Mhm.
focus on the mission, or they could focus on what's important to them, or they could focus on what keeps them motivated, and things like that. So it's important. Core, financial stability and core financial benefits, and employee benefits are vitally important, even if they're not quite as sexy as, oh, we have ping pong tables, and some of the things we associate with best employers. I think more important is making sure people have a livable wage,
Right.
and enough time for life. And then if people have money and time, they can figure out solutions to their own work life challenges, right?
Right.
So I think fundamentally that's a baseline thing, and then all the everything else beyond that goes beyond that. And I profile several companies here with hourly employees who start them at $18 an hour. Nobody makes less than that, and that's, as you know, more than double the minimum wage.
Mhm.
Um, and those who extend retirement plans and health insurance even to part-time hourly workers, or extend educational benefits or tuition reimbursement for hourly employees. So there's lots of different ways we can support all types of employees at all different levels.
Yeah, I feel even as an employee, and I have to look at it a little bit employee, because people are wondering, how do I find these jobs that's supposed to where they are? So does it help? And I talked a little bit, I think, from the last hour, that there are some employers that actually do talk about their values. Like you go to Bank America YouTube channel, they talk about working with disability
Mm-hmm.
employees. So is that a good way for the employers to really start utilizing some of the new tools now to kind of broadcast and to clarify their ultimate mission outside of the products and services they offer for profit,
Yeah,
and they're trying to make a difference?
absolutely. So first off, employers need to sincerely do the right thing, and then
Right.
communicate that they do the right thing, right? And if they're just talking about it, there are plenty of employers, I'm sure, who talk a good game about being an employer of choice and we care
Mhm.
about this and that, who really don't. But so I wouldn't necessarily take, and not to pick on Bank of America, I wouldn't take their word for it.
Well,
I
right, right.
also
I know
do
what
my
you're saying.
research as a job seeker, right? And see, there's the fortune lists and the working mother lists and the fairy god boss, and I'm sure resources that that I don't even know. But
Mhm.
the reputation of employers, and now that we're in a more interconnected world, if I'm applying to a company for a job, I'm going to check out LinkedIn. Do I know anyone in my network or somebody in my secondary network who works there, and then can I talk to them?
Much more reliable. Absolutely.
Right. So you want to do your research there. And then finally, I think if you're interviewing at a new employer, and especially now, I would take those last 10, 15 minutes of the interview and really ask questions like, how did your company take care of people during the pandemic? For your work at home employees, how did you make sure they weren't like overworked and working all night because there was no separation? How do you make sure people felt physically safe once you started returning them to the office? You know, those types. And if the person is stammering and gives you just very vague answers, that's your answer. But if they can, with pride, talk about, yeah, this is what we did. We bought 35,000 laptops for our employees so they can work from home. We did weekly, fitness online, we gave people mental health days every other Friday afternoon off.
Candor. It's the candor. It's if I'm listening to someone talk about it, say, we didn't do so well. This is where we didn't do well.
Sure.
This is where we plan to do well. There'll be more
Sure.
potential buy-in as opposed to saying that, hearing them mumble and think that they did something when they really didn't do anything. And two, people are going to look more now at who's leading the team and who is the individuals leading the team than the company at mass at large, because it's going to be their experience with that person and how they lead more so than the mandates that they hear from the company and what their actual mission is.
Yeah, there's some research that shows the second most important relationship people have for their work, for their life satisfaction, is their direct supervisor.
Yes.
Their spouse first, and then the direct supervisor next. And it has a big impact. So you're not just evaluating a company, right? You want to make sure that when you meet your potential coworkers, meet your potential boss, that there's some sort of meeting in the minds and some sort of fit and mutual respect there. I think that's really, really important. And also it's a responsibility then that I hope managers and leaders recognize and take on, that I can really not, I could be a crappy boss, I could be an okay boss, or I could be the kind of boss that helps my employees have a really good experience at work, and then that spills over to the rest of their lives as well.
Sure. So in this book, at this particular time, knowing the imbalance there is in the job market at this particular time, what would you say would be the biggest, most relevant takeaway right now from your book, and people bringing them whole selves and the employers trying to make room for people to do so?
Yeah. So I think that, we went from a pretty high unemployment level to now, relatively low. The labor market dynamic has shifted, right? So I think people who have options have more options than they have for the past few years, right? So they should be really, again, ask those questions, do the research to see if you could find a place that doesn't just pay you well and give you interesting work to do, but also will consider the rest of your life and you as a whole person. So that's one thing. I mean, we saw, lots of people, it's hard to work in a kitchen. It's hard to work on a construction site.
Sure.
And they're starved for employees right now, right? Because they haven't, maybe they're starting to pay a little bit more, but they haven't really rethought the relationship between employer and employee. I mean, I remember I listened to some sports radio, so I've been hearing ads all the time for these trucking companies who are like, we're looking for drivers, and we're like, now you get health insurance day one, and all this extra pay and bonuses and sign-on bonus. You can see that they're starting to figure out that there's more to more to recruitment than there had been before, right? And then from the job seeker point of view, again, at least for now, you might have a little more choice. So be smart about that. Use that choice. Or if your employer, if you'd rather stay at your employer, maybe talk to them about hey, listen, I want to stay here long term. Here's a few things that would really help me do that. Maybe if you help subsidize me getting, or you pay for me getting this professional certification, that would help me feel better about staying here for the next 2 years, or something like that. I mean, I hate to make everything very, negotiation, but,
but it slightly is, right? I mean, part of it is.
Employees have a little more leverage than they had before. in either finding employers or renegotiating terms. And that's one thing the younger generations of job seekers, they're seeking out organizations that fit their values more so than prior generations did, and they're making decisions that aren't necessarily the same as prior generations, just maximizing money or career tracks. And I think that's much more healthy, as long as you're getting paid enough, right? I think it's that's taking care of yourself in a more holistic, kind of whole personish way, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Scott, I appreciate you spending time with me as always. It's always great to talk to you.
If
And
I
of
can
course,
just put this up on the screen
yeah,
here.
the
Yeah,
whole person workplace, you can find August 17th is the release date, if I'm not mistaken. Is that
yep,
correct?
yep, two.
And yeah, and I think even though you tilt it more towards employees, employers, everyone in the workplace now, if you want to kind of get an idea what the future is going to look like, this would be the book to get.
Yeah,
So I know I look forward to reading it myself. So unless you have anything else to add, oh, I thank you so much for coming on, and you'll be hearing from me soon.
Mark, it is always a pleasure, my friends. And
Yes.
again, I'm so proud of this book, and thank you for helping me spread the word. I think it's going to help build better workplaces for everybody.
All
Thanks.
awesome. Thank you so much, Scott. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Take care. All right. Well, thank you very much for if you're watching, thank you very much for